Hey, happy Easter. That would be the alternative if we didn't believe in the resurrection. And maybe some of you here today are even questioning the resurrection, but this would probably be the alternative. It would have to be, hey, let's steal the body, tell everyone he was resurrected, and then we'll all die for our troubles, which is such a fun video because there's so much irony to that. Obviously, it's satire, but there's some truth to it as well. I want to welcome everyone to Westbridge Church. My name's Jeremiah. I'm one of the pastors here. Welcome everybody joining us online, those of you in a parent viewing room, those of you hanging out in our cafe as well. And man, it's Easter. It's 8 a.m. service at Easter, and you all are here. It's amazing. You are the early risers. So give yourself a pat on the back. Yeah, you beat the traffic. On this day each year, we celebrate an amazing thing. That nearly 2,000 years ago, this is a day that we celebrate that truly, it changed the trajectory of human history. We look back on this day, and there's a turning point on this day in human history. The calendar is marked around the life of this person. And there's certain things that are monumentous days in all of our lives, right? Certain things that we can look back at and just go, oh, I remember that day specifically. There's a few in my life. I remember the day that I first met my wife. We were both teenagers. It was way back in the 1900s, and that's when we met. I remember our wedding day. I remember the birth of each of our 4 kids. There's just certain days, right? I remember the first service we ever had at Westbridge Church almost 19 years ago, and I remember the day Chipotle opened in St. Michael. Just monumentous occasions, right? And for many, it's graduations, it's weddings, it's all these big events. For sports fanatics, it's the day that their favorite team wins the Super Bowl. I've heard that's pretty cool. I don't know about that firsthand, but for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we celebrate this day because it represents this defining moment in human history. And unfortunately, the further we're removed from that first Easter, the more desensitized we become to it, sort of the more commercialized Easter becomes, and we sort of tune it out. It starts to become a little bit like white noise. And any parent can tell you that you get this skill of tuning certain things out. Right? Parents just know this. Like when a kid is crying, I know I can tune out certain things based on which kid is crying, how hard they're crying. Like I can almost tell which kid it is, what body part got hurt, and how bad. It's like, oh, I hear something. Yeah, okay, that's Liam, level 2 pinky toe. He's going to be fine. All right. And I just tune it out. And I think if we're honest, if we have any experience at all with Easter, a lot of times it kind of becomes the same thing. It becomes a little bit like white noise. It's kind of like, okay, we go to church, right? We kind of go to the service. We hard boil a bunch of eggs. We color them all up, right? We hide the basket and we eat egg salad for a week. And it's like, that's Easter. And we just kind of go through the motions. And sometimes we can lose the wonder of like what is actually happening on this day a couple thousand years ago. And I'm not sure what your thoughts are about Easter or what brought you here today. Maybe you're just looking for some free coffee and an hour of childcare. And that's cool. We do that every week. You're welcome to that anytime. But maybe grandma told you, hey, you gotta go to service if you're going to participate in Easter. You got to participate in all of Easter. If you want Easter ham, you got to go to service. Maybe you're just exploring faith. Maybe you're trying to figure out this whole God thing. You're trying to figure out like, okay, I'm not sure where I stand with faith. I'm not sure where I stand with God, church, whatever label you want to put on it. And you're just trying to figure that out. And you're kind of like, dipping your toe in the water and exploring. That's awesome. Wherever you find yourself, I just want you to know, whatever brought you here, I'm glad you're here. It's awesome that you're here, but there's something you should know about this place. This place is full of imperfect people who are just doing their best to try to find hope and healing through Jesus. And because of what we're celebrating today, the resurrection of Jesus, we genuinely believe there is hope for every person. And here's why this matters so much. If you've ever wondered what the Bible is really all about, and sometimes you look at the Bible and it feels a little daunting, and you're like, how do I even read this, or where do I begin? But the story of the Bible is really the story of you and me. It's your story, it's my story. It's the story of how God, who created the universe, is seeking out relationship with people like you and me. And then it's the story of how people like you and me broke relationship with God, and the whole story is how God moves through human history to restore relationship with broken people like you and me. It's a fascinating story, and he did it through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so the resurrection of Jesus, you get to that part in the story, it is the turning point in the whole story. And my prayer is that it might be the turning point in your story today as well. Now, I brought something with me today. This is my box of failures. Actually, it was supposed to say failures. I ran out of room, so even writing failures was a failure, unfortunately. And there's a few things in here. I carry this around with me everywhere I go. This stays in my car. I bring it with me everywhere that I go, just to remind myself of failures in my past. This is, played basketball my whole life. Just retired a couple years ago, hung it up. You probably read about me. And 10th grade, had the opportunity to go to the playoffs. Ball's in my hands, just a couple of seconds. That was an air ball. We don't talk about that. What else do I got in here? Oh, I have a spelling test from 2nd grade. Been carrying this around for a while. Yeah, that's not very good. There's a bounce check in here. Oh, here we go. This is a DIY project at our house, and we called in the professionals after that. There's a lot of flooding. We won't get into that. This is the first sermon I turned in seminary. Yeah, a big failure. This is last week's talk, okay, so that's in there. And now this would be ridiculous, right? To think, okay, he actually carries around a box of all of his failures. But the truth is, to some extent, we all kind of do this, don't we? Like I know my failures more than anybody else does. And you know your failures better than anybody else knows your failures. And I know the parts of me that are broken more than anybody else does. And you know the parts of you that are broken more than anybody else does. And here's what's crazy. Let's do a little mass confessional here this morning, okay? Lift your hand and wait till the end. Wait till the end. I'll ask you a series of questions, and then we'll lift our hands if any of this applies to us. But at the end of this, lift your hand if you've ever flunked a class, if you've ever bombed a test, if you've ever been cut from a team, if you've ever messed up an audition, if you've ever been rejected for a date, if you've ever crashed your diet, if you've ever single-handedly destroyed an entire bag of Doritos after 11 p.m. when nobody else was awake, if you've ever been fired from a job, if you've ever been pulled over, if you've ever been given a ticket, if you've ever been arrested, if your business didn't go the way that you dreamed it would, if you've ever lost your cool with a 3-year-old, if you've ever experienced any kind of moral or relational or social or academic or athletic or moral or vocational failure of any kind, go ahead and raise your hand. Wow, what a bunch of losers. Just like me. The truth is, no matter how good we all look on the outside, we all wrestle to some degree with our own brokenness, with our own failures. We know the areas where we've fallen short, and we're all in the same boat. We've all got junk in our past, and yet so many of us really do carry the box of failures around with us. And so I'm here to tell you on Easter weekend, the good news of the cross, the good news of Jesus' death and his resurrection is there is a perfect God who gives hope to imperfect failures like you and me. That's the story. That's the message. And the hope that God gives, it's not wishful thinking. His hope is a rock-solid, fresh start, clean slate, second chance, rise up from the ashes kind of hope. And there are a lot of things in life that are overrated. There are restaurants that are overrated. There are vacation destinations that are overrated. There are movies that are overrated. I learn every single spring there are March Madness teams that are overrated. A lot of things in life are overrated. Hope is not one of them. I'm telling you, when we're trapped in a tunnel of despair, it's hope that helps us to see a light at the end. When we're overworked and exhausted, it's hope that gives us fresh energy. And when we're tempted to quit, it's hope that keeps us going. When we're struggling with a debilitating or a crippling illness or disease, it's hope that helps us push through the pain. When we are forced to say our final farewell to those that we love, it's hope that helps us to navigate the grief. And when we fail, it's hope that lifts us back up. It's hope that picks us back up. Lots of things in life are overrated, but hope is not one of them. And because of hope, we believe this: failure need not be final. Wherever your failures are, wherever you fall short, it doesn't have to be final. In case you didn't know, the Bible is filled with stories of incredible failures. Huge failures. People who needed hope. I mean, page after page after page of people like you and me. Strong people who blew it. Courageous people who wilted under pressure. Faithful people who at times acted less than faithful. People who wrecked relationships, cheated their families. People who dishonored their friends, broke their promises, betrayed others, thought God was finished with them, said to themselves, I've gone too far this time. I'm never going to recover this time. I could never come back from this decision. People like you and me. One of those guys was a guy named Peter. Now, his name was actually Simon, but at some point in time, Jesus actually gives him a nickname, Petros, which means Peter, which means rock or rocky. So before there was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and before there was Sylvester Stallone, there was Petros, Peter, the rock. And everything we know about this professional fisherman suggests that he was kind of a big, broad-shouldered, barrel-chested, kind of rugged-faced, ripped kind of man's man, you know? Just imagine me with sandals on. And Peter's a good guy with a really big heart. He's very loud, impulsive, strong-willed, opinionated. He would be the first guy to stand up and give you his 2 cents. And on one occasion, Jesus is talking with his 12 disciples, and he says, now, guys, I hear the rumor mill. I hear the scuttlebutt, what people are saying about me, but who do you say I am? And before anybody else can speak, Peter doesn't miss a beat. He just stands up and he goes, I know exactly who you are. You are the Christ, which is a word that means you are the anointed one from God, the next king, the one who has come to save the world from their sins. You're the Son of the living God. And Jesus just kind of smiles at Simon and he says, you know what? And I'm going to start calling you Peter, which means rock, because on the rock solid foundation of that statement that you just made, the truth that you've just declared, I'm going to build my church. And so Peter is the rock, strong, committed, loyal, dependable, courageous, tough. At least he thought he was. Now fast forward to Jesus' last meal with his disciples, the night that he's arrested. And after dinner, they go out to a ridge on the east side of Jerusalem called the Mount of Olives. And while they're there, Jesus is describing for his disciples what's going to happen. He's kind of trying to warn them and say, hey, something's going to happen, and there's some things that are going to go down. And I'm going to be arrested, and I'm going to be put to death. And they really didn't want to hear it. And he's trying to warn them about things that are to come. One of the things he says is this: this very night, you will all fall away on account of me. And in his sort of prideful self-confidence, Peter thumps his chest and he's like, oh, okay, hold on. Let me speak up. And here's what Peter says. He says, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Jesus, I don't remember you calling anybody else the rock. So they might, but not me. I'm going to stand with you. Truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. Not me, Jesus. Everybody else might, but not me. And I think the toughest failures in life to get over are the ones that we pridefully declare could never happen to us. The ones we go, well, not me. I can see how other people might do that, but not me. That'll never happen to me. In our prideful self-confidence, if we think that we're so strong that we could never fail, I think we're in more danger than we think. That's what makes the Titanic one of the most famous failures in all of history. The visionaries, the creators, and the engineers of this incredible luxury liner were certain this would be one ship that could never sink. The 26,000-ton hull of this ship caused everyone to believe that it was unsinkable. And so as it pulled out of the port on its maiden voyage, one of the passengers looked at a crew member and said, is this ship truly unsinkable? And the crew member shouted back to her and said, lady, God himself couldn't sink this thing. So no one could have imagined the nightmare that unfolded when on its maiden voyage, this unsinkable ship plunged to the bottom of the Atlantic on April 15th, 1912. The most staggering failures in life are the ones you thought could never happen to unsinkable you. The ones I think could never happen to unsinkable me. And when they do, you're left to wonder if you're ever going to resurface again. That's how we find Peter after Jesus' death. We find Peter on a boat. He's not on a luxury liner in the Atlantic. He's on a small fishing vessel on the Sea of Galilee. And the boat is steady, and Peter is not. He's feeling pretty unsteady. And he's that one that's sinking, drowning in a sea of regret and shame, probably replaying this night over and over in his mind. How in the world could I have done such a thing? You see, just 3 days earlier, their story took a dramatic turn when, as they're out on that east ridge on the Mount of Olives, Jesus is arrested. We read the story in Luke, and it says, then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. They took him to the house of the high priest, and they began to interrogate him, and we're told that Peter followed at a distance. Peter followed at a distance. He didn't stand by his side. He kind of stood back and wanted to see what happened to Jesus, and he follows at a distance. The strong, courageous rock, Peter, followed at a distance. After declaring he was willing to die with Jesus, we find that he's unwilling to even stand with Jesus. The one who had left everything for 3 years to follow Jesus, is now following at a distance. And it makes me wonder how many of us, if we're truly honest with ourselves, we would use that same description to admit that that's a pretty good description of how we're following Jesus these days, at a distance. And nobody sets out to go, well, I don't want to follow Jesus when you start following Jesus, but life gets in the way, right? Things happen, you get busy, and pretty soon you realize, you know what, I still want to follow Jesus, but I'm kind of following him at a distance. And then the unthinkable happens, and we find ourselves doing things we said we would never do. And so Peter wanders into this courtyard. He's just outside of the house. He's in the courtyard of the high priest. And he's kind of seeing how this interrogation is going to go. And he's kind of sitting out there watching and waiting and seeing what's going to happen. And as he's sitting out there, here's what we discover. That when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly, this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." And Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Imagine this moment. He's looking through the smoke, and he locks eyes with Jesus, and he realizes Jesus was right. I just did the thing I said I would never do. And then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Can you imagine how that scene is unfolding? Peter runs away, collapses in a pile of shame, and just cries his heart out. The once proud, indestructible Peter is a failure, no longer bold, no longer committed, no longer courageous, not even remotely close to being willing to die with Jesus. He just runs away and he carries his guilt and his shame with him. And it wouldn't even be until the next day that he hears about the crucifixion and he hears about the death of his friend and the death of his Lord. And as Jesus' followers were dealing with this incredible grief, Peter, his grief over the death of Jesus has another layer to it as he also carries a burden of shame and regret. It would be a couple of days later, Sunday morning, that some women would go to the tomb where Jesus, his body was laid. And when they arrived, they don't find a body. Instead, they find an empty tomb. They show up at dawn on Sunday morning and they go to anoint his body with spices, and instead they just discover the stone has been rolled away, his body isn't there, and they rush back and they tell the disciples what they've seen. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. And that makes sense because in their experience, people who died generally stayed that way. They're like, no, he's alive. We don't know what happened. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb, and bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. Now notice, he does not go away and go, "He's alive. I knew it. Yes, let's go. Let's celebrate." He wonders what happened. He didn't walk away seeing Jesus is alive. And if you're here today and you think resurrection sounds like a lot of nonsense, I got to tell you, you're not alone. When you read the eyewitness accounts, you discover there's not a lot of hope. What you find is a whole lot of skepticism and a whole lot of cynicism and a whole lot of doubt and questions. A lot of wondering. If you're making up this story to try to perpetuate some kind of a legend, you wouldn't write it this way. Right? If you're trying to keep the Jesus movement alive, you would talk about how you stood by your man. You'd write yourself into the story as a hero, how you rallied around him in his hour of need. And yet what you discover from the disciples is that they behaved like cowards. They all scattered. They didn't even show up to his burial. And then Jesus starts making cameo appearances all over Jerusalem. He starts showing up and appearing to people. He shows up to a couple of guys who are on their way out of town. And they don't realize it's Jesus at first, and then suddenly they realize this is actually Jesus that we're with, and he leaves their presence, and immediately this is their reaction. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem, and there they found the 11 disciples and the others who had gathered with them, who said, "The Lord has really risen. He appeared to Peter." They're going, "Guys, the Lord has risen. He appeared to Peter." And Peter's in that room going, "Yeah, it's true. I saw him." Now, here's what's amazing. one of the very first people Jesus appeared to was Peter. And the question that I got to ask is, why? Why Peter? We don't have any record of that interaction, but I have to imagine that Jesus wanted to tell Peter that he loved him and that he forgives him. And yet, for some reason, it seems to go unresolved. It's as if Peter can't receive the forgiveness that Jesus is offering. That, like, what he's done just feels too unforgivable. And if you've ever felt that way, it's no wonder that you've followed Jesus at a distance, or that you've kept God or faith or church at arm's length, or maybe put it in the rearview mirror. Because many of us have convinced ourselves, that faith thing that probably works for other people, but Jesus wouldn't want me. If he knows some of the things that I've said, if he knows some of the things that I've done, some of the decisions I've made, some of the ways that I've lived my life, some of the things that I've done to other people, how I've treated some other people, how selfish I've been somewhere along the way, that probably works for other people who are good. But if he knew me and he knows my past, it's probably not going to work for me. But Jesus is about to show Peter, and in the process show us, that nothing could be further from the truth. And so Peter decides to go fishing. He knows Jesus is alive, but he's just going to go back to what he knew. Feeling that his shot to follow Jesus is lost, that he forfeited that, he goes back to what he had always known, and he gets in a boat and he goes fishing, and he's in this fishing boat, and every time that he closes his eyes, he just remembers that night. Just replays it over and over again, that scene, standing around that fire, looking through the smoke into the eyes of his best friend and his Lord, and he can't get the image out of his mind, just floating on the waters of regret. Can anybody relate to that? I think all of us have floated in a boat called failure at one time or another, and some of you might have even come in here today and you feel like you're riding in it. Some of you are watching online, you feel like I'm riding in that boat right now. And you feel sunk and deflated and ashamed and embarrassed, wondering if you're going to ever resurface again. You brought your failure box today, and you're going, yeah, I've screwed everything up. For some of you, it's, I've ruined my marriage through decisions that I've made, through selfishness. For some, it's, I've gambled away our savings. My addictions have cost me my career. My anger has cost me a relationship with my kids. My loved ones won't speak to me anymore. I've betrayed my best friend. I've broken God's heart. How in the world could I resurface from my failures and find renewed hope? Is there a way to sort of rise above the guilt and the shame and the embarrassment? And the answer is yes. Yes, there is. The message of Easter is yes, there is. Look at how Jesus deals with Peter. At dawn, they're fishing and they see someone on the shore. And this is the most Minnesota thing you've ever heard in your life. Jesus goes, have you guys caught anything? You've never walked onto a dock in Minnesota, seen someone fishing, and not said, hey, buddy, you catch anything? It's the most Minnesota response in the world. And so Jesus calls out, and they don't know it's Jesus. They just see a guy on the shore, and he goes, you guys catch anything? And they go, no, we got skunked all night. And he goes, throw your nets on the other side. And they throw it on the other side, and they just start to haul in fish. More than 100 fish. They start to pull them in. And suddenly it jogs Peter's memory. He had another interaction like that with Jesus about 3 years earlier. In fact, it was one of the first interactions he had ever had where Jesus says, let's go fishing. And they weren't catching anything, and he said, throw your nets on the other side. And they brought in so many fish that their boat started to sink, and it was then that moment where Peter started to realize who Jesus was. It was in that moment that Jesus said to Peter, I want you to follow me. And now, here we are, 3 years later, and it's as if the scene is mirrored, and he once again fills Peter's nets to remind him of the first time that he started to follow Jesus. And as soon as Peter realizes it's Jesus, he doesn't even wait for the boat to get into shore. He takes off his coat and he dives into the water and he swims into the shore. And John tells us when the rest of them arrived on the shore, they found a charcoal fire burning with breakfast cooking. It's an odd detail. In fact, the detail of a charcoal fire only shows up one other time. John writes a few chapters earlier, it was 3 nights before, where Peter had denied Jesus. Specifically, it was around a charcoal fire at the courtyard of the high priest. Why does that matter? You know how certain smells bring back certain memories? Like memories are so closely associated with smells. Anytime I smell a glue stick, I'm immediately transported back to Miss Doble's second grade class. It just brings me there. I can picture it. It's just like, oh yeah, I remember that. A charcoal fire has a very distinct smell. So suddenly there's a charcoal fire on the beach. And I got to imagine as soon as Peter smells it, he's immediately transported back to 3 nights ago, where he denied Jesus, denied knowing Jesus. Now he's standing once again and he's looking through the smoke of another charcoal fire into the eyes of Jesus. And this is what happens. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my sheep," Jesus told him. And Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said, "you know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt that Jesus asked him the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything." He would say, "You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." 3 questions of love to match 3 denials, to redeem them. Jesus didn't ask, "Are you sorry? Do you feel bad? Ask for forgiveness, try to make it up to me." Jesus just wanted his heart. He just wanted him to know that he's forgiven, that he wants his heart. And then, this is so amazing. This is what Jesus says to Peter next. And then he said to him, "Follow me." The same words he used the very first time they interacted. Follow me, follow me. Peter, feed my sheep, take care of my sheep, build my church. I want you to follow me again. I want you to build my church. And Peter went on to become one of the greatest builders of the early church. The guy that we would have assumed was getting kicked out of the club just got put in charge of the whole operation. And how is that possible after such a failure? Because failure need not be final. And Jesus specializes in personalized resurrection. See, there's nothing that you've done that's bigger than God's grace. There's no failure that's bigger than God's forgiveness. There's no amount of shame or guilt or embarrassment that would exclude you from God's family. Jesus would look at you the same way that he looked at Peter, with love and grace in his eyes, and he would just say to you, "Follow me. Follow me." The resurrection of Jesus reminds us of this. No one can go back in time and make a new beginning. But anyone can start today and create a new ending. God is way more concerned with your future than he is with your past. And we believe the resurrection of Jesus really happened. That's why we have so much hope. It's not because the Bible says so. It's way better than that. The only reason we have a Bible is because of eyewitnesses who wrote down their experience. We believe because Matthew, who was an eyewitness, wrote down his experience. And John, who was an eyewitness, wrote down his experience. And James, the brother of Jesus, wrote down his experience. And Mark and Luke and others, they documented not what they believed and not something they were taught as a kid from some sacred scroll. They documented what they had seen and what they had experienced for themselves. And we believe because they documented how over 500 people saw Jesus alive again. And we believe because Peter, an eyewitness, saw Jesus alive. And later he would be executed at the hands of Emperor Nero because he refused to waver from his story. And before his death, Peter wrote a couple of letters to followers of Jesus in the first century. In one of these letters, he's writing about the power that the resurrection of Jesus had in his life, how it changed the trajectory of his life. And he writes to encourage followers of Jesus who would read this, why he had so much hope, even after a big failure, even in the face of certain death and execution, why he still clung to hope. Here's what Peter writes. He says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth in a living hope." You'd say, well, why does he give us new birth? What is that? Why do you have such confidence, Peter, in the face of failure? Like, what is this based on? How can you be so confident of this hope? He would say, well, it's through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. If you ask Peter why he had such hope, he wouldn't hang it on the parables of Jesus. He wouldn't hang it on the teachings of Jesus. He wouldn't hang it on the miracles of Jesus. He would say this, "My hope was resurrected when Jesus was resurrected." When Jesus came back to life, my hope came back to life. Not only that, we have this new birth into a living hope, he would say, and into an inheritance that can never perish or spoil or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you. This is such good news. Peter had the hope of eternity with Jesus, not because of something he was told as a child, not because of something that he was taught to believe. Peter had a living hope because of what he saw in the resurrected Jesus. And folks, that is what you are invited into. This is what all of us are invited into. This is the hope that is available to every single person who puts their faith in Jesus as well. Today, you're invited to leave behind your box of failures. You're invited to leave that here, to exchange it for God's forgiveness and his grace and his mercy. And if you acknowledge your failure, just say, this is my box of failures. And God, I've been trying this on my own and I keep falling short. So I'm going to give this to you, and I want you to start leading my life from now on. And you ask Jesus to forgive you. Here's what Peter says. You get this new birth. You get to be born into a living hope, and you receive an inheritance that will never spoil or perish or fade. It's a living hope and an inheritance as a part of God's family. Now, if you've never said yes, or you'd like to commit to that, I want to invite you to do that. When Jesus died on a cross, he took all of your failures, all my failures, all of our sin, all of our shame, all of our brokenness, and it was nailed to the cross with him. And when he died, that died with him. His body was laid in a tomb, and according to so many eyewitness accounts, hundreds of people saw Jesus alive again. That's why Peter would say, you can be born into God's family. You can have a hope that will last, not only in this life, but the life that is to come. And if you want to say yes to that invitation, would you just agree with this prayer, whether you're in the room or online? God, please forgive my sins. Forgive me for, God, my failures, where I've fallen short, where I've kept you at arm's distance, or even put you in the rearview mirror. Thank you for pursuing me and loving me. God, I want to say yes to your invitation. Make me your son, make me your daughter. Help me to put my trust in you, to follow you as best as I know how. And there's a lot of failures I'll still, that will happen along the way, but God, I'm trusting that your love, your forgiveness, your mercy, it's bigger than my failures. So I'm asking you to lead my life. Thank you for loving me. I pray this in your name. Amen.